let's take a look at some college football preseason predictions from a betting standpoint. I am Joe Duffy, CEO of OffshoreInsiders.com. You know, we always say these preseason publications, and no question that Phil Steele, from a gambling standpoint, puts out the best one there. There are a lot of limitations. We used to rely on them a lot more back in the 1990s and the 1980s, maybe the early part of this century, but the Internet has so many sites, some of the high-profile ones, even some lower-profile ones, the local sports writers, etc., that have intel that evolves long after these publications come out. So I have a few things that are on my preseason watch list, but every single one of them are truly that, a watch list, some things I'm going to keep an eye on. My current opinions are subject to change as new intelligence come in based on the practice reports, etc. But as of this recording, I would look as Texas A&M as a very likely fade. Remember, last season, everything that could have gone right for the Aggies did go right. They had Johnny Manziel, of course, who became the first freshman to win the Heisman Trophy, pulled that humongous upset over Alabama, but we look for a little bit of a regression to the mean. Not only that, but Johnny Football, his ill-advised offseason comments, puts the pressure cooker on them. They're in uncharted waters. What's one of our golden rules of gambling that's been so true when we've had some very specific applications of this? We always say it's a lot easier to be the hunter than the hunted. Texas A&M made their Cinderella run as the hunter. Now they're the hunted, especially with a guy who's going to try to become the second man in history to win 2 Heisman trophies. Theoretically, I guess he could win 3 or 4. He won't stick around as long. I'd imagine this will be his last year. But Texas A&M, a lot of things went for them right last year. We look for them to be a team to fade this year. Now, West Virginia probably will be a team that season long the bet on, and especially unders. But as we explain here, this is why we really have to keep a close eye on how their practices go and how some of their beat writers, some opinions that we expect, what they say, how West Virginia will evolve. They followed a pattern much more common last year to teams progressing in a superior league. They rode the momentum of being in the Big 12 early, got off to a pretty good start, but then playing an unprecedented schedule for them where they had to play quality teams each week caught up to them, and they became a huge fade at the end of the year, getting annihilated quite often. Now, their head coach, Dana Holgorsen, has 4 good running backs, but he lost star quarterback Geno Smith and his top 3 wideouts. Now, that's interesting because going back to his days in the MAC, they always had a pass-oriented offense. Holgorsen has, and the Mountaineers potentially, if they make the adjustments based on what their talent is and run the ball a lot more, Mountaineers will pull off some upsets because they're playing in a conference that is much more used to defending the pass than the run. But we're going to keep a close eye on that to see if West Virginia truly does run the ball substantially more than they have in the past. And as I said, if they do, they're going to be, like we said, predictably unpredictable. They're going to win some games outright that they should probably lose. But at the same time, then once they build up the expectations, because they don't have that much of a passing game, I think they could be a victim of upsets themselves. So look for West Virginia to be on both sides of upsets this year. Now, their totals are going to be bloated. Even though they could have some high-scoring games, still expect more than their share of unders. And speaking of such high totals, Arizona's improved defense. Rich Rodriguez plays a chuck and duck offense, as we like to say here at OffshoreInsiders.com. Now, that puts the onus on the defense, constantly placing them back on the field. Ravaged by injuries and learning a complicated new defense last year under new coach Jeff Castile, like me, a graduate of California University of Pennsylvania, actually announced his games when he was in college. He was a senior when I was a freshman, so I'm not quite that old. But Wildcats' defense was absolutely atrocious last year. Now they're familiar with the schemes, but keep in mind they had a bunch of guys last year who were true freshmen who really didn't even belong on the field, were actually pushed in the starting roles. Add to that, as we said, they were learning new schemes and they were on the field constantly. Just a terrible combination. So they're a team that everything, more particularly a unit that everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. But listen to this, and this isn't very frequent, but they have 20 players on defense who started at least one game last year, a year to learn the system. Their defense will be much better. Now, they're still going to have very high totals, and they will have some high-scoring games. But remember, the games with them can be high-scoring and still go under the total. So probably going to have to sweat out some unders, but look for Arizona's defense to be much better, helping them both spread-wise and when it comes to the under. Duke, lunch pail team, this is more of a for information only. We think at times it can be a little overrated. You could have a great offensive line. If you don't have skilled position players playing behind them, all of a sudden that offensive line could look so-so. Duke, though, for those of you who believe games are won at the point of attack, maybe a perfect dark horse. They return both guards, both tackles on an offensive line with a combined 100 starts returning. Clemson's a team that is built for 2013. Here's the thing. Everybody knows that they're not going to sneak up on anybody. Tigers just have a long history of faltering under such circumstances when they have very high expectations. Dabo Swinney, maybe the current poster child for a good recruiter, may not be a great coach. Look for Clemson to be one of the worst money line teams of any BCS school. They're going to be on the wrong side of a few upsets this year. Louisville, look for them to be a classic hunter rather than the hunted team. They have really upgraded. Big time Louisville has turned into a legitimate football, I'm not going to say powerhouse, but a legitimate football force. Charlie Strong has done a tremendous job, but now they're going to play much tough. Take a look at that schedule. This is the toughest schedule they ever had to face with raised expectations combined. I'm telling you, folks, Louisville going to be a big fade this year. Another one of those hunter rather than the hunted type teams. Hard luck Michigan State's going to rebound. I cringe anytime I hear somebody talk about the quote-unquote law of averages. There is no such thing as a law of averages. But the bottom line is Michigan State last year, very deceptive record on the tough side. They lost 5 conference games by a combined 13 points. So thus they will come into this year a little bit undervalued. And if they even have a normal balance of good fortune and bad fortune, they're going to be a much better team this year. So Michigan State, a team that will be on the right side of a few upsets. Do you want to be on the right side a whole heck of a lot more weeks than the wrong side? You certainly want to visit offshoreinsiders.com, the top source in the entire world for sports betting information. www.offshoreinsiders.com, led by me, Joe Duffy, America's only Grandmaster Handicapper. Get my picks on God's Tips, the anchor of offshoreinsiders.com.